Years ago, back when I was but a young bot, I had a growing fascination with video games. To a mind not yet poisoned by the cynicisms of adulthood, video games were like strange windows into entirely different worlds and realities. And they felt magical in a way that nothing else in life did. That was also helped by the fact that, especially at the time, games were just kind of weird. I was born in the early 90s, so my first real memories are from that late 90s, early 2000s turn of the century span of gaming, with consoles like the N64 and the original PlayStation. And that whole era kind of feels like a fever dream in retrospect. Half the games I remember playing would make the average modern publisher CEO spontaneously combust if you brought him into a boardroom meeting, which honestly would be an improvement on the current state of affairs. Blazing Dragons was one such game. It was a point-and-click adventure game on the original PlayStation, oddly enough, with a very cartoonish art style set in a medieval knights and dragons fantasy land following the adventures of Flicker, a dragon inventor on a quest to become a knight. I have no clue why this game fascinated me so much as a kid, but I remember playing it a lot, even though I didn't really know what was going on half the time. I still love the art style, and the backgrounds genuinely look really good. I was also impressed with the voice acting, but then again, that could also be because this was around the same time as...
You were almost a Jill sandwich.
Another game my young self was inexplicably obsessed with was Tomba, or Tombi, as it's known outside the States. The world of this game was a goddamn trip with its visuals, and I played it so much that this damn song in particular is forever burned into my psyche almost 20 years later. PlayStation wasn't the only console to have bizarre games that intrigued me as a kid. Anyone remember Iggy's Wreckin' Balls on the N64? How about Mischief Makers, Glover, or Buck Bumble?
What about now? It's time to rock with the biggity buck bumble.
And if any of you out there recognize a stall, I will be genuinely impressed. The 90s and early 2000s was such a bizarre time for gaming, and also just kinda in general. New technologies were creating a whole new frontier for games with few established formulas, so devs were just throwing all kinds of darts at the wall to see what would stick. Even games that didn't go 3D, since devs now had a whole lot more space and power to work with. And some ideas stuck really well. Others kinda, didn't, but that time of raw experimentation was such a blast to grow up in. It made every single game I picked up feel like a whole new, entirely unpredictable adventure. Of course, industry trends eventually catch on as developers figure out what works and what doesn't, and successful formulas exist for a reason. Gaming is a business after all. Still, I live for those times when I come across something genuinely bizarre in today's market. The more scuffed, the better. And while it is even more of a Wild West than the time I grew up in, today's indie market can still spontaneously conjure up something pretty cool from its amorphous, unknowable, chaotic depths. Take one look at Fly Night, and you'd be forgiven to assume it's a RuneScape clone, and I'm talking old school RuneScape, especially with these damage numbers and sound design. I mean, it's not exact, but it's pretty clearly inspired. And while it is technically a Souls game, yet another in the infinitely growing mass that will one day consume us all, I still really enjoyed it, and it stuck out to me a lot more than I thought it would. What struck me most about it was how it's got more mechanics than you would expect a small game like this to have. A first-person Souls-like is already pretty standout, and the combat is slow, methodical, and emphasizes fewer attacks with proper timing, with a really punishingly small stamina bar. Everyone in the game is an anthropomorphic insect, so each one has wildly varied fighting styles and weaknesses depending on what type they are. You got four-armed rogue ants, quad-wielding knives, bulky beetle knights that use a huge shield and a sword, samurai wasps that use their wings to fly around you, and then you got these things. Which are just kind of there. Even more cool is how you can dismember each individual limb until they're unable to fight back, at least not effectively.
Look, you stupid bastard, you've got no arms left. Yes, I have.
You can even decapitate them and they don't immediately die, they just start taking damage over time until they do, which is a nice touch. But then you have the weird mechanics that just kind of exist, like fishing. At really irregular points in the game, you can stop to do some good old fishing, and each fish you catch gives you different temporary buffs when eaten. What's weird is that it's introduced right after the tutorial segment, and you'd think this would mean it'd be a central mechanic to the whole experience, but it kind of isn't. It's just sort of there. You also equip the fish before you eat them. I don't know how that works. I assume you just slap a bunch of live fish onto your belt and move on. Then you got the weird stylistic choices, like how the messages you encounter all spawn in with individual letters, all making this noise. This happening with each message you find, and the longer the messages, the more you hear. And yes, it is a bit annoying, but more than that, it's just odd. The tone of the game is much more serious than you'd expect about the adventures of a knight with a fly head slapped onto its neck, including instances of literal insect racism from the wasps. The level design also leans on that stylistic draw distance shade, and combined with these visuals, everything feels very surreal. Also, one of the bosses is literally called a phallus. So, you know, make of that what you will. It was probably supposed to be a hard fight, but I just stood a few feet away from it and practiced the ancient art of hit it with every single arrow in the world until it died. It never hit me once. Okay, so that's all nice and kooky, but what do I mean when I say games should be weird again? There's still plenty of bizarre games with uniquely strange settings, stories, or styles, so what makes Fly Night so special? Well, I'm not just talking about how a game looks, I'm also talking about how a game feels, which makes this point incredibly hard to put to words, much less in a succinct way, but essentially, games just don't feel as experimental anymore, if that makes any sense. It wasn't uncommon for multiple games to have the same kind of mechanic or have similar ideas, but have their own unique ways of executing those ideas. So while you had familiarity, you didn't have consistency. Which is probably more of a bad thing than good, objectively speaking, but it certainly made games feel more surreal, since you didn't know what to expect half the time. Even veteran franchises like Mario, Mega Man, Zelda, and Sonic all hit vastly different strides during this era. It's ironic then that I get that same feeling from a game that lifts mechanics from an established formula, but I think that's because it doesn't do it entirely point for point. You have de facto bonfires, a single limited healing item, and enemies that respawn when resting, but you don't have things like stat leveling, so you can use all weapons, armor, and spells without worrying about being suboptimal. Combat is even slower and clunkier than expected. You have limb-based damage, it uses an art style that is entirely unrelated to this whole genre, and fishing, and stuff like this. Couple all of that with the low detailed environments, the strange sound effects, and a somewhat odd but pleasant soundtrack, and somehow we end up at that same feeling. Yeah, I know that isn't really a concrete answer, but somewhere in this jumbled up mess of an equation is the key that gets us to my point, I guess. Fly Night is unique in that I can't tell what part of its jank is intentional weirdness or a bug, but I was deeply fascinated with it and just kind of adjusted to the jankiness because I genuinely wanted to see where it was going. Now granted, that's a holdover from a time when most kids had like 1 or 2 new games at a time and you just kind of had to make do with what you had. These days, kids open up their tablets or phones and have literal millions of free choices to drain their brain cells with the tap of a finger, and I swear, most of them look like they were made by an AI trained exclusively on shovelware and rage bait. I'm convinced that 70% of mobile games are made as tax write-offs, and I have no clue about the other 30%. And look, I'm not saying polish is bad. Not every weird game is gonna be good. In fact, most aren't. Some oddball games are odd because they're half finished, ran out of budget midway through, or never had a cohesive vision to begin with. And with money feeling less real than ever these days, I absolutely get wanting something that gives you a good amount of bang for the amount of buck you're throwing into the void. But there's still something magical about playing a game that doesn't entirely know what it's doing, but is still trying its best to be something memorable. It's unrefined, it's a bit unfocused, it's not always pleasant every step of the way, but there is absolutely real vision and passion here, and it just sticks with you in ways that a more polished experience never will. Basically what I'm saying is if I'm not quite sure I'm witnessing a design decision or a developer's cry for help, it sticks in my head longer. Because at the end of the day, everyone plays games for different reasons. You may do it to relax. You may do it to be competitive. You may do it to show off to your military head friends how smart you are by leaking classified government documents on the internet. But me, I don't play games to win. Not all the time. I play games to have an experience, to form memories, and to have an adventure that'll give me fun stories to tell later. I play games to feel something, even if that something is tinnitus. Subnautica is still one of my favorite games I've played in recent years, and that's because of both its legitimately masterfully done atmosphere and sound design, and its vast amounts of inexplicable jank. What is going on? What? Why is everything breaking? When I was a kid, I didn't need cutting-edge graphics or tight combat to love a game, or at least be fascinated by it. I just needed creative presentation, a catchy soundtrack, and more than a few moments of questioning both my own sanity and that of the developers. And you know what? Flat Night reminded me that that's still true, all these years later. TLDR, life is short, life is weird, and stepping outside your comfort zone can give you memories that'll last a lifetime. So just don't be afraid to approach something on its own level and just adapt to the jank it brings. Thanks for watching, everyone. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm gonna go tape a fish to my arm and see if it boosts my editing speed. Hold up, before we head out, I got one more announcement. I am officially opening up channel memberships for anyone who wants to directly support what I do here. You can find more information by clicking on the join button below, and depending on the tier you choose, you get some pretty cool perks, like emotes, supporter-only Discord roles and channels, or having your name listed or read aloud at the end of each video. Truly amazing, groundbreaking stuff. Really though, I'm kind of just wanting to concentrate support for the channel around as few places as possible because, well, Patreon has been getting less attractive for a lot of reasons. I figured, screw it, I'll just bring it here. Also, getting anybody to follow a link anywhere that isn't YouTube is like trying to herd cats at the best of times, so this just solves two problems at once. Anyway, thanks for watching, everybody. Y'all have a good night. I'll see you next time. Next big video is in the works, and oh god, I'm trying my best.